that we talked about yesterday.
Okay, we're gonna continue, and the next item is the Health and Human Services reductions, and I would ask my colleagues not to get into the weeds on Health and Human Services policy this afternoon. We're going to have plenty of time with the Health and Human Services directors. We just want to get a handle on the numbers. And I would like to ask the director to present all of the Health and Human Services items in a single shot. And then when she gets done, then we'll take a break and take questions. And then after that, the director will present the budget additions, and we'll do the same thing. And then after that, the director will present the departments, which she tells us is relatively brief. So we can get through this hopefully in an hour or so. So, Ms. Keenan.
Okay. So for Health and Human Services, the total cuts to the Department of Health and Human Services, so combining all the divisions, was $7 million in both years. And the cut was largely spread out among the divisions. So just very briefly, it's $4.5 million in personnel, which assumes a reduction in overtime expenses, most notably in the the Division of Job and Family Services, which has upwards of about $6 million in overtime spending every year. Slight reductions to the child support program for some contracts that are no longer needed. We're assuming additional revenue for some fatherhood activities, which is included in the child support budget, and we are cutting the allocation for the Children with Medical Handicaps program. I want to say very clearly that this program is mandated by the state, so the cut was based on the historical utilization. We are not anticipating a cut to the services provided, nor will we deny services if they are requested from the county, but just based on past utilization, we haven't been over budgeting in this area.
For each of the items, you said $4.5 million on personnel. Could you give us the numbers on the other items?
Sure. So the Children with Medical Handicaps is a $1.3 million reduction. It's $100,000 to the Family and Children First Council, which is the Closing the Achievement Gap evaluation. We are assuming we can do that in-house, so we will do an evaluation. It just won't be contracted out. For child support program, it's an $18,000 cut to contractual services, an assumed increase of $100,000 in additional revenue from the TANF program, and we are proposing a 10% reduction to the fatherhood contracts, which is $100,000. And then there's a $500,000 reduction to the Office of Early Childhood for the Quality Child Care program. This is based on anticipated number of slots that will be filled. This program does not utilize all of the slots that it has received funding for in the past. I do want to note, we talked about this kind of at length last week, that we are assuming a reserve on balance in the Health and Human Services Levy Fund equal to the amount of the cuts. This budget in Health and Human Services, like the budget in total, as I mentioned earlier, it's a collection of assumptions, and we are proposing to right-size this Health and Human Services budget based on past utilization of services. If these assumptions don't hold true, the executive is prepared to draw into the cash balance in the Health and Human Services Levy Fund, which is projected to be $47 million at year end, to restore funding to all of these areas. The cash balance, I will note, in the levy fund is significantly over what is mandated by county code. Any questions on HHS?
Yes. We heard some earlier discussion about the collaborative program being reduced. Is that still anticipated? You didn't mention that.
No, that has been restored.
Other questions by my colleagues?
Mr. Chairman.
Yes,
Okay.
Council Vice President Jones.
And Director Keenan, can you elaborate on the elimination of the CTAG evaluation?
Again, so what we're eliminating is the outsourcing, excuse me, of this evaluation. We will still do an evaluation, but it's my understanding that the department has, at least within the last year, hired someone who's capable of doing the evaluation. I believe he used to work for a case who was contracted to provide it in the past. So he's familiar with the program, so we can do this service in-house for no additional funding.
Do you know the name of the person who was hired?
I don't.
No.
I can get it for you.
Okay.
Ms. Conwell.
To the chair, to the director, can you provide a list of the items that were from last budget cycle that were taken from HHS levy fund and placed in the general fund?
We didn't transfer any expenses from the levies to the general fund. It was the other way around.
Around,
So we did transfer some expenses from the general fund to the levy.
But I think it was the year before, the biennial budget before that. It was a one time that we had transferred things in.
I think it was always from the general fund to the levies. No?
No, it can't
Oh.
go the other way.
It
Yeah,
can
it can
legally,
go either
but
or.
it's just,
'Cause
in
it was
terms
a
of
lot of
ending cash
justice.
balances, I don't think it
It was
ever would
before this
have.
administration. It was the end of the first administration. There was we were dealing with budgets, and there were some things that were taken from general fund.
You're right, you're right.
To go,
You're
I
right.
mean, from the,
So,
so I just want to know where all that is.
I can,
'cause
yeah,
things
I
been
can talk
juggled
about
back.
that. So there was like a year and a half when I wasn't at the county, and that's when that happened, but you just jogged my memory. So what we transferred from the levies to the general fund was the Witness Victim Program, which is advocates for victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. That's about, this year it's 1.9 million, so at that time it probably would have been 1.7 or something like that, that went from the levies to the general fund. We also transferred the Family Justice Center allocation, which would have been $175,000. We split that between the city of Cleveland and the county. And the treatment alternatives to street crime program in the Court of Common Pleas. So we give a subsidy to that program of about $400,000 or $500,000 a year. Again, I don't know what it would have been at that time. And there's one more.
And how much was the family justice? 'Cause I
Family
knew there
justice
were-
is 175,000, and that might be it.
Okay.
But those have all been transferred back to the levies. So they all came,
Okay.
they all came back in the budget in 2016 and 2017. They were levy funded, and they are still levy funded in the proposed 18-19 budget.
Thank you.
Ms. Brown.
And I apologize if I missed this. The Neighborhood Collab Program, will the funding be the same as last budget?
Yes, we have not reduced the budget. I can't attest to the fact that they're going to allocate the same amount, but the total budget has not been cut.
So what about the providers? Will there be, are you sure there will be no decrease in providers?
No, I'm not sure. So all I can affirm is that the budget to Children and Family Services has not been reduced for neighborhood collabs. But from the fiscal office perspective, you know, the agency gets a budget of $150 million. They can allocate it within limits, however they see fit, as long as it's within the guidelines of what council approved. So I cannot confirm that there will be no cut to the providers themselves. It's my understanding that we're not planning on cutting that, but that's a question for Cindy Weiskettel.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Director, the budget includes some additional payments on behalf of employees for health care in both the general fund and the HHS, is that correct?
It does. So as part of the recommended budget, we are proposing to increase the employee share of employee health care for medical mutual providers, because we're no longer using UHC in 2018, going from 10% to 12% in 2018 and 14% in 2019. For medical mutual providers, going from 3% to 7% in 2018 and 10% in 2019.
And Director, if we're not able to get the $4 million increase in Title 4E and other juvenile court items that are HHS related, we have a significant problem. Is that correct?
We have a significant problem in total. So as I mentioned, the $5 million, what the executive recommended or requested from juvenile court, the fiscal office applied at $1 million to the general fund and $4 million to the levy fund, but the court can reallocate that as needed. At this point, since it hasn't been done prior to the submission of the budget, if the budget is approved in terms of what was presented, the court will have to come back and we'll have to do it as part of the fiscal agendas to increase and decrease appropriation. The $4 million was not assumed to be all Title 4E. That's just part of the package. The court had submitted a number of cost savings initiatives in both general and levy fund. We meaning OBN, did not know how to apply those specifically to the budget, so we just applied them kind of in bulk to certain areas of the budget and then assumed the court would request reallocations based on their needs.
Is there any reduction in adoption services funding?
No.
No. And
We had originally discussed it, if that's why you're looking confused.
No.
It's not been cut.
And is there any reduction in DCFS board and care?
No.
No. Okay. And is there any reduction in DCFS client services?
No. That's kinship care. That's actually on the rise. Demand for that is on the rise.
Any other questions on HHS?
What's on the rise? I'm sorry.
Kinship care. So we have the number of children in care has been increasing
Right.
pretty significantly over the last year. Specifically, we're up about 250 kids from this time last year. Most of our kids go to families, so those are called the kinship providers. So it's aunts, uncles, grandparents, somebody in the family. The need for that program is on the rise because we have more kids in custody.
So that will go up a little bit.
It has gone up from previous years. We're not assuming a continued increase. The number of kids hit 2,000 in, I think it was around May of this year. I'd have to check again, but that was the highest we've been since 2011. And then we have been steadily, albeit very slowly, decreasing from that 2,000. So we are not assuming that the need for kinship services or boarding care or any of those services is going to increase in 2018. We're assuming we're going to stay at the same level.
Why do you assume that? I thought there's an increase in kids in our custody.
We're assuming that 2018 is going to look like 2017. So we're definitely up from previous years, but we're not assuming it's going to continue to go up. 2017, for the first half, we were at our highest. We have been going down.
So the level of funding for that program stays the same from where it was in 17 that was able to address these kids?
From the 2017 projection. So that's a little bit different from the budget. They have reallocated their budget in DCFS
Okay.
to make sure that where the increases are, which has been in kinship care, and I think a little bit in boarding care, has gone up. And the 2018-19 budget was based on the projections.
Okay.
So from budget to budget, it's probably up. From projection to budget, we're assuming it's going to stay the same. So we're assuming if we don't have an average of about 1,950 kids next year, we might have a problem in the budget, depending on what services those kids need. And depending also on the types of services, even if we have 1,700 kids, if we have severely troubled kids, then the cost goes up. But in general, it's been relatively flat this year.
Ms. Brown?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So can you provide details on the proposed cuts to the contract, where they may be in the many services they provide
For DCFS?
for starting point?
Oh, no, I
No?
can't.
Okay.
I'm sorry.
All right.
That's a question for Rebecca Dorman.
Rebecca
Dorman.
Dorman. I hope you're listening. Thank you.
Yeah, well, she'll be here on Thursday, I think. Or somebody else can, I just can't.
Okay. Okay, let's move on to the proposed additions.
Okay, so the recommended budget does include additional funding from what's in 2017 for some specific areas. The largest is Department of Development, so we are proposing to increase funding to the Department of Development for $250,000 for a contract for outsourcing the loan servicing in the department, $350,000 for new positions, $50,000 for staff training. So that all goes to the department's operating budget. And then any questions on development? I should stop.
Well, please,
The next one's not
please
development.
just go
Okay.
through the
Okay,
whole
okay.
thing.
And then the largest other initiative is $3 million in the budget in total. So the general fund impact is $1.4 million to address pay equity issues in the executive agencies and departments. So this is largely focused on lower paid, non-bargaining staff, elevating their salaries. And the 2018 budget includes $3 million that is inflated in 2019 by the 2%. That's it.
And are we proposing the housing program?
Oh, sorry, yes, but that's not general fund. So we are proposing a new housing fund in the 2018-19 budget, $1 million in 2018, $2 million in 2019. This will be to address a number of issues, I think including like down payment assistance, some renovation assistance for homeowners. And I do believe that they said they would tap this fund as needed for demolition. We are proposing to draw down the cash balance in the Development Revolving Loan Fund to support this fund in the biennium. So this is different from the Economic Development Fund. The Department of Development has two revolving loan funds. One is the Development Revolving Loan Fund. It generates revenue from loan repayments for loans that were issued out of this fund. So this is pre-Economic Development / Western Reserve Fund. There are no expenses in this fund except for a transfer of some revenue to the Brownfield Revolving Loan Fund. The Development Revolving Loan Fund has a cash balance of almost $5 million. So this budget proposes to draw down $3 of the $5 million cash balance over the biennium.
Okay. Any, are we doing the additional funding for the Brownfield program?
No. That was proposed in the initial budget conversations, but we don't feel that there's capacity right now in the department to do more than we're already doing. The department does get money from the Ohio EPA to do brownfield work, and like I said, they get some money from the Development Revolving Loan Fund to do mostly Phase 1 and Phase 2 assessments, but we don't believe that we can increase capacity by $1.3 million at this time.
We certainly are well aware we don't have staff capacity right now. We only have basically one person working that
That's
program.
correct.
So, okay. Any other questions about the proposed additions? Okay. We've learned some stuff today. Okay. Now, the capital improvements program, item number 3, we pretty much went over that in the course of discussing the reductions. I would ask if anyone has any questions about the capital improvements program that they have not asked so far. I don't see any. So we're going to move on to the review of various departmental budgets. These are departments that either have their own revenue streams or else are small departments where we don't think there's significant budget questions, and thought that the that the director could just run through them. If, as a result of our discussions today, we feel we need to bring in any of these departments, we can, but we're hoping that primarily that won't be necessary. Ms. Keenan?
Okay. So the first one is the Board of Developmental Disabilities. They are here if you have questions that I can't answer. The board's proposed budget for 2018 is approximately $180 million. The 2019 budget increases to about $182 million. The increase largely reflects payments made for the waiver match for services provided to clients. The board receives funding from a number of different sources. The county impact is that the board does have a 3.9 mil continuous levy that was approved 2005. That is continuous, so it does not have to go back on the ballot unless the council decides that they want to change the millage on that levy. That brings in about $103 million a year. It's the same as our smaller health and human services levy. I do want to note that the board's budget over the last several years has been reflecting a decrease in staffing levels. The board has been mandated to shift from direct service provision to contracting service provision. So there was a federal decision for Medicaid, I believe, that if you are making the referral for services, you cannot provide the services yourself. It's a perceived conflict of interest. We have the same issue in JFS. So the board has been shifting from providing the services with its own staff to contracting for those services. As a result, staffing levels have gone down, so personnel expenses have gone down, but what's gone up is the waiver match that the board has to pay on behalf of the clients for the services provided. This has been increasing pretty steadily over the last couple of years. It shows no sign of slowing down, and it is a challenge for the board's budget. Probably not in the next biennium, but I know the board is scheduled to come before council at another date to talk about its budget and its services in general. And I think that we will have an issue in the coming years as it relates to the Board of Developmental Disabilities. And I mean that lovingly, but we've never really worried about them in the past because they have their own revenue source. They have had a substantial cash balance for years and years, but they have been drawing down that cash balance. They've been operating in a deficit for the last several years, which is turning around, so that's the good news, but the cushion isn't there anymore, and that waiver match keeps increasing. So as I mentioned, for the current biennium budget, we don't see any issues with the board. Their revenue is sufficient to cover their expenditures, but for the next biennium budget, there probably will be a conversation relative to how the board operates and or the levy that generates a good portion of its revenue.
Where are they at on cash balance right now?
So in 2017, the estimate is approximately $86 million, and their budget is $180 million.
So at one point they were over 100, so they've drawn it down a little bit, but it's still pretty healthy.
It's healthy. So as I mentioned, we don't see issues with them over the next 2 years, but as they are drawing down that cash balance, it's something that we need to consider. We don't want to see them deplete their fund.
How much are they predicted to draw down in 18 and 19?
$13 or $14 million
Is that per year or total?
per year.
Per year, that's quite a bit.
It's quite a bit.
Okay. Any other questions on DD? Okay, please proceed.
So the next is the Veteran Services Commission. Veteran Services funded exclusively by the county's general fund. They are entitled by statute to 0.25 mils. I do want to point out that the 5 large urban counties receive less funding from their counties than the remaining. So the 5 urbans get 0.25 mils. The rest of the counties receive 0.5 mils of general fund dollars. our county is 33rd in funding per capita for veterans per capita. The commission's budget for 2018 and 2019 is set at $6.9 million. This represents a slight decrease from the budget in 2017, but it is an increase over what we're projecting the commission's going to spend in 2017. So we are projecting a bit of a surplus for the commission this year. I do want to note, we've discussed this before, but the council passed a resolution several years ago that the surplus in any current year in the Veteran Services Commission budget is appropriated the following year in the Veteran Services Fund. So the funding, the general fund dollars that were originally allocated to the commission are dedicated to veterans, even if they aren't spent by the commission itself. Any questions? Okay. Department of Workforce Development. Workforce is funded almost exclusively from federal workforce initiative, WIOA dollars. Their budget in 2018 is $12.4 million. 2018 and 19 is $12.4 million. This is a slight decrease from the current projection of $13 million in 2017. We do want to note that the department moved its location in 2017. It's had slight reduction on service levels just because there were some changes as they were switching from departments. We don't see any issues in 2018 as it relates to that. Workforce will be affected by the proposed $500,000 reduction to the Educational Assistance Program for the college scholarships. Any questions on workforce? Okay. The law library is funded through a combination of municipal fines and fees and forfeited bail dollars. They do not receive any general fund support as of 2011, I believe, 2010, but we are obligated to provide them space. So the law library is in the 3rd floor, I think, of the old courthouse. I'm sorry? Oh.
I'm sorry. Beautiful space.
Oh, it is a beautiful space. They're looking, okay, so I'll go right to their space. They are looking at making some changes to the space this year, which may or may not be a request to the county since we are obligated to provide them space. They would like to brighten it up. It is a little dark in there, but it is a beautiful space. But so that's one of their initiatives for 2018. The law library's budget is set for 2018 and 19 at approximately $460,000. And this is a slight decrease from the 2017 projection of $550,000. The law library is in agreement with the budget that we're presenting though. Any questions on them? Okay. Solid Waste Management District. They are not general fund. They're supported by fees on waste generation throughout the county. Their budget in 2018 is set at, for both years, 2018 and 19, at $2.1 million. This is, again, a slight decrease from the 2017 estimate of $2.4 million, but the district is supportive of the budget that's being presented. Questions?
Could you say that again? I'm sorry.
The budget?
No, the
For the whole thing?
2.1, and then you said it was initially 2.4.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. So it's 2.4 is the estimate for 2017. So the next year's budget is a slight decrease, but the district is agreeable to the budget that's been presented.
Thank you.
Next is the Department of Regional Collaboration. That budget is $260,000 in 2018 and $265,000 in 2019. The increase is exclusively personnel, so as I've mentioned before, we are assuming a 2% increase on all salaries, and the employer share for hospitalization is going to increase as well as the employee share. So that's that increase. The 2017 estimate for regional collaboration is $255,000, so it's basically unchanged from the current year estimate. Any questions for Eddie Krause?
Yeah, maybe I missed that, but it looked like it doubled, I thought. Maybe did I
No.
miss?
It's 250,000 this year and 260,000
Oh,
next year.
okay, all right.
Okay. Sustainability. 2018 budget is approximately $300,000. 2019, $304,000. Again, the increase is all personnel. This is a slight decrease from 2017 estimate of $360,000. The Department of Sustainability they currently have a vacancy that they are replacing at a lower rate than the vacant position. So they had a deputy director who resigned, I forget when, but in the last couple months, and they're going to be replaced at a lower rate. So that's why the budget is going down next year. Any questions about them? Ohio State University Extension is budgeted at $222,000. This is a levy-funded budget, and there's no change from the current estimate. It's $222 in both years. The extension uses the county dollars, they leverage it with other sources, so as long as they get some appropriation from the county, they can use that to draw down other funding sources. I will note, we did get a request from Central State University for funding in the budget. I think it was $50,000. I can confirm that. That was not included in the executive's recommended budget. My understanding was that they were going to come to council directly. I don't know if they have yet, but it's the same idea as the Ohio State, that if they get the appropriation from the county, they can leverage the funding, but this was not included in the executive's budget. Questions? Internal audit.
Yes.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mr. Chairman, is that $50,000 per year or 25,000?
Per year.
50,000 a year. Okay.
And I'll confirm that, but I'm pretty sure it was 50,000 from Central State. The Department of Internal Audit budget is 590,000 in 2018, 598,000, almost 600,000 in 2019. This is a slight increase from the current estimate of 530,000. Again, personnel, exclusively personnel related. Internal audit is working on their audit plan for 2018. It's not been approved yet. That will be approved by the audit committee in December and then made available to the council. I will note, just because it came up in conversation this year, that internal audit is a charter agency. It's in the charter that they are supposed to charge for their services, which we have never done. But we do include the Department of Internal Audit in the county's indirect cost plan. So we are recovering their costs from the other non-local funded agencies. Questions? Miscellaneous payments and obligations. This is kind of a catch-all for expenses that can't really otherwise be categorized by department. In 2018, the budget is $5 million. It's $5 million in 2018, $5.5 million in 2019. That can't be right.
I thought they did say 3, but
That can't be right.
I guess the reality is 4.
Oh, the CIP is separate. Okay, sorry. And so this includes the payments to the city of Cleveland for the public defenders. So the public defender has a defense counsel on staff that operate in the city of Cleveland Municipal Court. We get paid by the city of Cleveland to do this. It's not a county obligation, but the city feels that the public defender's office can provide the best services. So the city pays us for the full cost of the budget. We process the reimbursement from the state and then transfer that reimbursement from the state back to the city. So those payments are booked as expenses to the county, even though the revenue does come in to offset it. That's where these expenses are captured. We also have $2 million in this budget in both years as a contingency allocation, so it's to be determined. We had $2 million in the 2017 budget for contingencies, and we spent about 400,000 of it. These were part of the fiscal agendas that came before council. We tapped it early in the year for the medical examiner's office to increase personnel so that they could address rising caseloads. They had been out of compliance for a period of time from their National Association of Medical Examiners accreditation. And then we also we used part of it to come to the Department of Communications. They had a position that was not included in the budget. And we did something else recently that I'll have to get back to you on. But in total, we've spent about 400,000 of the $2 million allocation. And we are proposing another $2 million in each year for contingencies.
Mr. Chairman? Yeah. I think I just heard you say that the city of Cleveland, when they pay us for the service, that the reimbursement that the county gets at the state level, you give that reimbursement to the city of Cleveland.
We do, because they pay us the 100% of the costs.
45%, is that the ratio?
That's correct. 45% is the reimbursement from the state.
Reimbursement. So if the city of Cleveland receives their reimbursement for those dollars, what about the public defender when they have a 45% reimbursement? Am I accurate in that they are not receiving, is that 45% reimbursement is not going back into the public defenders?
It is indirectly. So it's revenue to the general fund. If you look at the schedules, it's what's reflected as the other intergovernmental. That's exclusively the public defender reimbursement. So it doesn't, general fund agencies we don't record revenue for them like we do for this other special revenue funds. General fund revenue is to the benefit of all of the general fund agencies. So no, technically the public defender doesn't receive that $15 million, but they have a budget of larger than what we're getting from the reimbursement, so they are benefiting from it. Because we're paying 100% of the public defender's costs. The state only gives us 45%.
Right. So I guess the direct answer is the 45% when it comes back from the state, it's not going back to the public defenders logistically, directly, it's not going back.
No general fund agency, they all come into the same fund. So if you think of funds like bank accounts, we have special revenue funds, so a lot of the health and human services agencies have their own bank account. General fund agencies do not. They all draw from the same general fund. So correct, the public defenders doesn't get the check for the whatever we get from the state and get to deposit it, but they are given a general fund budget that it far exceeds the amount of reimbursement we get. So they do benefit from that.
They're not being shortchanged in any way in that respect.
No. Because we wouldn't get the reimbursement if we weren't paying the expenses.
Ms. Conwell.
Through the chair, to the director, kind of on Councilman Jones' standpoint, it's been explained to me, but still, even though I understand that the general fund dollars are what we use in the first place for the public defender's office, and we're just basically getting reimbursed the 45%, the public defender's office is still impacted because when they ask for increases, we're not making that happen. And so whether that be in investigators or whatever they need, so they're still being impacted. So I was kind of thinking of a way that if, since we do get the 45%, that we could possibly utilize some of that to go in a specific fund for them when they do, not all of it, of course, we're upfronting the cost, but in order to offset if they do have some needs in the future, to get parity between the public defender's office as well as the prosecutor's office.
So the parity is a separate issue that we probably won't address today, but I would like 5 minutes to talk about parity between the public defenders and the prosecutor's office. But to your point, I would respectfully request that we not set up a separate fund, only because it's inconsistent with everything we do with the general fund. General fund revenue benefits the county's general fund. The public defender, so their reimbursement rate from the state fluctuates. It was in the 20%, it went up to 48% last year, it went down to 45% this year. When the reimbursement went from, I forget what it was before 48%, but say it was 40%. When it went from 40 to 48%, no, the public defender did not get an increase. So they didn't benefit from the additional revenue that we received as a result of the reimbursement. At the same time, though, however, when the reimbursement rate dropped to 40%, we didn't cut the public defender and say, well, now we're not getting as much money. So we don't make decisions based on that funding source. That's why I'm saying I will rely on then the other general fund sources to keep the public defender whole. In the case where the reimbursement rate drops and when the reimbursement rate increases, this is a policy decision on the part of both the executive and the council, but that increased reimbursement could benefit the public defender, but it could also benefit common police court, juvenile court, the fiscal office, any agency that's supported by the general fund. So, like I said, I would argue against the special revenue fund because it then makes what I'm saying completely irrelevant to say that it benefits all of the general fund agencies. But absolutely to your point, if the reimbursement fluctuates, it can and probably should be a topic of conversation. The public defender, they are coming, I mean, you know this already, but they are coming in with a request for additional funding. So I do want to be very clear that what they're asking for, I think it's close to $1 million.
900,000 per year.
Okay, so I round up.
right.
The general
You're
fund
totally
impact,
right.
though, is less. So you do want to consider the reimbursement rate because what they're not asking for $1 million from the general fund. They're asking for the difference between the $1 million and the 44% reimbursement.
Thank you.
It could benefit them in that way.
Councilman Schwan.
Yeah, on requests like the Public Defender's Office, is there any look back to say, gee whiz, what's their history? Have they been continually asking for funds, or have they deferred and not made requests? And it just seems to me they're one of the areas that that maybe was not as aggressive, say to speak, on budgeting as other departments, and as a result, I'm not saying you can catch it all up in a particular year, but should we make some efforts to try and get back to one of my colleagues talking about, and you said 5 minutes on parity at some point along the way, maybe that's at least something that ought to be considered, saying that when you, and that was where I was getting back on my uncomfortable question from about 2 hours ago. It was that percentages are not necessarily a good way to do budgets. You actually look at where the need is and address it. And in this particular case, it seems to me the Public Defender's Office has not been asking for monies the way other departments have historically.
So aggressive is a good word for it. The public defender historically has not been aggressive in asking for additional dollars. They have received additional funding over the years, but it's largely been in the area of personnel. So they have, to my knowledge, I don't really remember them getting funding for other expenses. We did increase their budget one year. They got new laptops, but that's about it. So in the area of technology, which I think is one of their focuses, I would have to agree that they have not sought nor been given additional funding. Like I said, they have been given additional dollars over the years, sometimes just not as part of the formal budget process, but Tobic was pretty good at asking mid-year. I think he thought people were more receptive mid-year because the pressure wasn't on. So he was very skilled in that regard. And so they did get a couple of staff positions mid-year that would flow into the next budget. Last year, they did receive additional funding for 2 prosecutors to work specifically in juvenile court for child support. But for other expenses, like I said, they haven't really asked. And they don't have the latest and greatest in that office.
Okay, please proceed.
Domestic Relations Court, Judge Gold is, my understanding, she will be here on the Public Safety Day, but I will just go over their budget in brief. The majority of domestic relations funding comes from the general fund. They do have a legal research fund that is funded by $3 on filings that can support legal research activities, as the name suggests. Their budget in 2018 is $9.8 million, and this is an all funds budget. And in 2019, it's almost just short of $10 million. That is a slight increase from the 2017 estimate of $9.4 million. This increase, again, is largely the employee hospitalization charges. So domestic's budget is almost exclusively personnel. They, especially in 2018, because they're taking over the mediation expenses, they have contracts for interpretation services, and maybe one or two others, but other than that, they're staffing. So the COLAs and the increase to the hospitalization rates are going to hit their budget disproportionately. They did take a $300,000 cut that was applied to personnel, and like I said, they are anticipating that they'll be able to absorb that through attrition and continuing to look at their positions and hopefully not filling some positions as they become vacant based on the court's needs. So if you will let me, I do have some bullets that the court asked me to read about their, what they did this year and what they're proposing for next year. So in 2017, the court opened a widely publicized help center to assist self-represented parties who now make up over 61% of cases, with over 4,000 people served since June 2017. The Pro Se Clinic has really helped us maintain expenses in domestic relations court. When the parties come and they don't have representation and they don't really know the process, it slows the docket down. So the Pro Se Clinic was a good proactive move, we think, on the part of the court. They launched a modernized website with essential information about family law, court processes, a court calendar, court performance resources, downloadable court forms, and a user survey. They created e-learning and management-led programs to train staff on topics such as high-performance leadership and management, coaching and leading employees, performance evaluation, business skills, avoiding injury and safety in the workplace, drug-free awareness, and sexual harassment. They developed onboarding performance management modules to develop staff to achieve personal and institutional goals. They developed trainings in continuing legal education for court staff with the Supreme Court of Ohio, the Cleveland Metropolitan Bar Association, the Cuyahoga County Sheriff, and the Rape Crisis Center. They established electronic filing for attorneys and self-represented parties to file new cases and motions in existing cases to increase efficiency and cost savings to taxpayers. They implemented a parenting coordination program for high conflict cases. They instituted electronic workflow processes to increase operational efficiency and the use of personnel. They streamlined contempt processes in domestic violence department, centralized assignment and scheduling services with the support enforcement services, and they introduced Case View Net to allow hearing officers to view court reporting transcripts in real time. One more thing on domestic relations. I just want to point out that approximately 50% of their budget, the general fund budget, is straight general fund, and then about 50% is supported with a contract with our child support program. So we do receive Title IV-D reimbursement to the domestic relations court. So you do want to consider if we were making cuts to domestic relations, just for example, cutting $1 million is not $1 million savings to the general fund, because $500,000 of that $1 million gets the Title IV-D reimbursement, which is 66%. So it's a pretty sizable rate of reimbursement. So you do have to keep that in mind when you're looking at domestic's budget.
If any of the other departments are watching on television, I would just remark that domestic relations got away with one a little bit because they weren't here and we couldn't tell them no, and I couldn't tell the director no. But we just do not have enough time in this process for the agencies to give lengthy presentations about what their departments have accomplished. As much as they would like to do it, and as much as we would like to hear it if there were unlimited time, but it's just a very, very compressed process, and there's a lot of issues to be dealt with, and so if there's agencies out there that are spending lots of time developing elaborate PowerPoint presentations to lay on us, I'm telling you now to save yourself some time and don't do it, because we just are not able to accommodate it in this process. We'll go on to the Board of Revision.
So the Board of Revision is funded exclusively from the Real Estate Assessment Fund. This is no general fund impact. The board's budget in 2018 is set at $3 million, and it goes up to 3.1 million in 2019. This is a slight increase from the 2000 current estimate of $2.9 million. I do want to point out, as we've mentioned, that the sexennial appraisal is taking place in 2018. So we do anticipate that there might be a need for additional hearing boards in 2019, which would mean some additional staff just to accommodate all of the complaints and appeals that come to the board so that we can dispose of them timely.
On that, I would just point out that we worked on it for a long time within the county council, and then it got sent to the to the Charter Review Commission, the last one, and they worked on it some more, and we came up with an amendment that, among other things, allowed us to vary the number of hearing boards based on the workload, and it's been very cost effective for the county here. The prior language that came from the original charter had a set number of hearing boards, and which at low times is more than enough, and we would have had boards sitting out there doing nothing. So we corrected that problem, and it's working very well for us. Any other questions? Okay, that concludes our work for today. I think we covered a lot of somewhat at the 30,000 foot level, but we covered the whole thing, and we have some sense of what all the major issues are. So I think that gives us a good foundation, and on Thursday we go into the hearings of the specific departments. So
Just briefly, we're submitting the executive's recommended budget book to council that we have done in the past. So it has a page for every department, including the ones that I presented today. So I just want to make it clear to council, as always, once you get that, if you have questions, just feel free to contact us.
And we're expecting that tomorrow, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay, that's great. Okay, so people will have some homework to do. Okay, thank you very much.
Would you mind 3-hole punching those? The book?
What?
Could you 3-hole punching?
Seriously?
Yeah. Don't you have a drill?
I have a what?
A drill.
No.
Oh, fine.
No, I have one of those old fashioned.
Oh.
No, I will not hold.
I'll drill my own then.
Okay. Yeah, sorry. We're not doing that. That'll take till Wednesday.
No, it takes about 30 seconds.
Yeah, no, we don't have that. I might be able to print them out. I don't, we'll figure it out. I will hold
If
them.
you need something drilled this big,
Okay.
give it to me, I'll make sure it's drilled.
Okay, we'll consider that miscellaneous business. Is there any other miscellaneous business?
That's weird. We're going to outsourcing.
Has anybody else signed in for public comment?
No, Mr. Chair.
Okay, there being no further business before the committee of the whole, we stand adjourned. Thanks, everybody, for your time and attention. It was a long meeting, and I appreciate it. Thank you. Thank you.